Music, Sophie Cunningham just dropped a truth bomb that has the entire WNBA talking. And what she said about the Indiana Fever's current situation is sending shockwaves through the fan base. After watching her team blow a 13-point lead to the Washington Mystics, Cunningham didn't hold back. She looked straight into the camera and delivered 6 words that cut deeper than any loss this season. Nobody thinks we can do it. But here's what nobody's talking about. While Cunningham was demanding accountability and calling out the entire league's perception of her team, head coach Stephanie White was in another room making excuses about defensive matchups. And the most shocking part, the Fever's best three-point shooter never even touched the court. If you're a Fever fan, you need to hear what's really happening behind closed doors, because what Sophie said next might just predict whether this team makes the playoffs or completely collapses. Make sure to hit that like button and subscribe if you want the inside scoop on what's really going down with your Indiana Fever. The numbers don't lie, and neither does Sophie Cunningham. The Fever just lost 88-84 to a Mystics team sitting at the bottom of the standings. Think about that for a second. This wasn't a loss to the Liberty or the Aces. This was Washington, a team that's been struggling all season, walking into Gainbridge Fieldhouse and stealing a game the Fever had already won. Indiana led by double digits. They controlled the first half. They had 40-27 at one point in the second quarter. Everything was clicking. The ball was moving, shots were falling, and it looked like the Fever were about to cruise to an easy victory. Then something shifted. And it wasn't just momentum. It was like watching a completely different team take the floor. Washington unleashed a 22-7 run that flipped the entire game. The Mystics weren't playing with some superstar having a career night. They were just executing basic basketball while Indiana fell apart. The Fever's offense went from fluid to frozen. Possessions turned into Kelsey Mitchell dribbling against double teams while teammates stood around watching. The defensive rotations that were sharp in the first half became confused and late. 21 fouls led to 26 free throw attempts for Washington. Every whistle felt like another nail in the coffin. And through all of this chaos, one player who could have changed everything never left the bench. Chloe BBY has been shooting 42% from 3 this season. Let that sink in. 42%. In a game where spacing disappeared and the offense turned into predictable isolation plays, the Fever's best floor spacer logged exactly 0 minutes. When reporters asked Stephanie White about this decision after the game, her answer was revealing. She said it was about defensive matchups and rebounding concerns. But here's the problem with that explanation. Indiana gave up those 26 free throws anyway. They allowed wide open threes anyway. They got dominated on the boards anyway. So what exactly was being protected by keeping BBY on the bench? The frustration in Sophie Cunningham's voice during her post-game interview was impossible to miss. This wasn't just disappointment about one loss. This was about a pattern that's been building all season. "I don't think anyone else around the league thinks that we can do it anymore," she said. And those words hit different when you understand the context. The Fever had just dropped to 7th place in the standings. They've now lost 4 of their last 5 games. The playoff race is tightening by the day. And every loss to a team like Washington feels like 2 losses when you consider the tiebreaker implications. But Cunningham didn't stop there. She went on to say something that should have every Fever fan paying attention. "We've got to get back to being dogs. Got to get back to being aggressive, being on our front foot, and not allowing teams like this to come in here and outwork us." Notice what she's really saying here. It's not about talent. It's not about injuries, so they've had plenty. It's about identity and effort. When a veteran player has to publicly call for her team to rediscover its competitive edge, that's a crisis of culture. Not just basketball. The contrast between Cunningham's message and White's post-game explanation couldn't have been more stark. While Sophie was taking ownership and demanding more from everyone, including herself, White was listing reasons why things went wrong. She talked about the offense getting stuck, about giving the ball to Kelsey Mitchell and watching her work. She mentioned the 22-7 run and the free throw disparity. All valid observations, but none of them addressed the fundamental question: what was the plan to fix it? Where were the adjustments when momentum shifted? Why did the same problems that plagued them in the third quarter continue through the fourth? Let's talk about what actually happened on the court, because the details matter. Aaliyah Boston put up 20 points and 9 rebounds. She was dominant inside, consistently drawing double teams and creating opportunities for others. Kelsey Mitchell finished with 14 points and 9 assists, nearly getting a double-double despite being asked to do everything on offense. Sophie Cunningham herself contributed 8 points, 6 assists, and 3 steals, including a momentum-shifting play where she picked off a pass and drilled a 3 on the other end. Odyssey Sims, playing on a hardship contract after being signed just days earlier, added 11 points and showed flashes of why she was brought in. These aren't the numbers of a team that should lose to Washington. These are the numbers of a team that did enough individually, but failed collectively. And that's where the coaching questions become impossible to ignore. When your players are producing but the system isn't maximizing their efforts. When obvious adjustments aren't being made. When rotation decisions seem to work against your team's strengths rather than enhance them. You have to wonder if the problem runs deeper than just one bad game. The injury situation makes everything more complicated.
And we need to be honest about that.
Caitlin Clark hasn't played since July 15th. She's been dealing with a right groin injury that's kept her sidelined for over a month now. Think about what that means for this team. Clark isn't just their best player. She's their entire offensive system. She's the one who makes everyone else better, who creates the spacing that allows players like Boston to work inside and Mitchell to attack off the dribble. Without her, the Fever are trying to run plays designed for a transcendent playmaker with players who, while talented, aren't built for that role. But it gets worse. Sydney Colson and Ari McDonald both suffered season-ending injuries in the same game last week. Colson tore her ACL. McDonald broke a bone in her foot. Just like that, the Fever's entire guard rotation was decimated. They went from having depth issues to having no true point guards available. That's why Odyssey Sims was signed to that hardship contract. That's why Mitchell has been forced to play out of position. That's why the offense looks so disjointed at times. But here's the thing, other teams deal with injuries too. The Dallas Wings have been playing without multiple starters. The Connecticut Sun have had their own injury problems. The difference is how teams adjust and adapt, and that's where the Fever seem to be falling short. Stephanie White's coaching tenure started with such promise. She was brought in to be the experienced hand who could guide this young team to the next level. She had success with the Connecticut Sun, taking them to the semifinals twice. She knew the Fever organization from her playing days and her previous coaching stint. Everything seemed to align perfectly, but the reality of this season has been far different from the expectations. The team is 18-16, barely holding on to a playoff spot. They've had stretches where they looked like championship contenders and stretches where they've looked lost. The consistency that White was supposed to bring hasn't materialized. Fans have noticed, and they're not staying quiet about it. Social media exploded after the Mystics' loss with criticism of White's rotations, her in-game adjustments, and her post-game explanations. One fan wrote, "How do you not play BBY when the offense is struggling? This is coaching malpractice." Another said, "Stephanie White is making Christie's sides look like a genius, and that's saying something." The comparisons to the previous coaching regime are particularly painful because many of the same problems that existed then seem to be persisting now. But let's be fair here. White is dealing with a roster that's been constantly in flux. Dana Bonner was waived earlier in the season after it became clear she wasn't fitting with the team's culture. The guard position has been a revolving door of injuries and emergency signings. The team has had to integrate new players on the fly while trying to maintain competitive in the toughest league in the world. These aren't excuses, but they are context that matters when evaluating what's happening. The real question is whether the current problems are fixable or if they represent something more fundamental. When Sophie Cunningham says the team needs to get back to being dogs, she's talking about more than just effort. She's talking about an identity that seems to have been lost somewhere between the injuries and the inconsistency. The Fever used to be the team that nobody wanted to play. They were physical, aggressive, and mentally tough. They might not always win, but they were always going to make you earn it.
That's not who they are right now.
What's particularly frustrating is that we've seen glimpses of what this team can be. They won 5 straight games at one point after Clark went down. They beat good teams during that stretch, playing with the kind of cohesion and intensity that Cunningham is calling for, but they haven't been able to sustain it. Every time they build momentum, something happens to knock them back down. Sometimes it's an injury, sometimes it's a bad loss, sometimes it's just inexplicable regression from one game to the next. The Sonia Citron factor in the loss to Washington is worth examining because it highlights exactly what's going wrong. Citron, a rookie for the Mystics, put up 21 points. She wasn't doing anything spectacular, just making open shots and playing within the system. Meanwhile, Aaliyah Boston, an all-star and one of the best young players in the league, was working her tail off for every bucket. The effort disparity was obvious, and that's what makes Cunningham's comments so resonant. When rookies on losing teams are outworking you, something is fundamentally broken. The upcoming schedule doesn't offer much relief either. The Fever still have to face playoff teams multiple times before the end of the regular season. Every game matters for seeding, and right now they're trending in the wrong direction. 7th place means a first-round matchup with a second seed. 8th place means potentially missing the playoffs altogether if they continue to slide. The margin for error is gone, and everyone in that locker room knows it. This is where leadership becomes crucial, and it's why the disconnect between Cunningham's message and White's approach is so concerning. Players respond to authenticity. They know when they're being challenged versus when they're being given excuses. Cunningham's willingness to call out the team publicly shows she's not accepting the current standard. She's demanding more, and she's putting her own reputation on the line to do it. That's the kind of leadership that can spark change, but only if it's supported from the top. The Caitlin Clark situation adds another layer of complexity to everything. Nobody knows exactly when she's coming back. The team has been saying she's day-to-day for weeks now. Reports suggest late August might be realistic, but even that's not guaranteed. And when she does return, there's no guarantee she'll be the same player immediately. Groin injuries are tricky, especially for a player whose game relies so much on quick changes of direction and explosive movements. The Fever might get their superstar back only to find she needs weeks to return to form. Meanwhile, the rest of the WNBA isn't standing still. The Liberty are rolling. The Aces have figured things out after a slow start. The Lynx look like genuine title contenders. The Storm have Jewel Lloyd playing at an MVP level. Even teams like the Sparks and Wings, who the Fever should be beating, are playing with more cohesion and purpose. The league has gotten better while Indiana has stagnated. And that's a dangerous combination when you're trying to make a playoff push. Sophie Cunningham's comments about nobody in the league thinking the Fever can do it anymore hit different when you consider where this team was just a year ago. They were the story of the WNBA, the team everyone was watching. Caitlin Clark's arrival had transformed not just the franchise, but the entire league. Attendance records were being shattered. Television ratings were through the roof. The Fever were must-see TV every night they played. Now they're fighting just to stay relevant in the playoff race. And the national attention has shifted elsewhere. But here's what makes Cunningham's words powerful. She's not accepting that narrative. She knows this team has more in them. She's seen it. She's been part of it. When she talks about getting back to being dogs, she's really talking about rediscovering the pride and edge that made this team special in the first place. It's not about talent. The Fever have plenty of that. It's about the intangibles that separate good teams from great ones. And right now, those intangibles are missing. The coaching decisions are just symptoms of a larger problem. When Stephanie White chooses not to play Chloe BBY, she's making a calculation based on some internal logic that might make sense in a vacuum, but doesn't translate to winning basketball. When she explains away losses with technical observations rather than taking ownership, she's creating a culture where accountability is optional. When she fails to make adjustments that everyone watching can see are necessary, she's telling her players that the status quo is acceptable, even when it's clearly not. This is where the rubber meets the road for the Indiana Fever. They can either listen to Sophie Cunningham's wake-up call and rediscover their identity, or they can continue down the current path and watch their season slip away. The choice seems obvious, but making it happen requires more than just words. It requires a fundamental shift in approach, starting with the coaching staff and filtering down through every player on the roster. The comparison to last year is inevitable and painful. Christie's sides might not have been perfect, but the team played with a certain joy and freedom under her leadership. They were fun to watch. Even when they lost, there was a sense that something special was building. This year, despite having more talent and experience, the team feels heavier, more burdened. The pressure to win has replaced the joy of competing, and it shows in how they play. What's particularly frustrating for fans is that the pieces are all there. Aaliyah Boston is a generational talent who's only getting better. Kelsey Mitchell is one of the best scorers in the league when she's allowed to play her game. Sophie Cunningham brings exactly the kind of toughness and versatility every team needs. Natasha Howard is a proven winner. Lexi Hull has developed into a reliable defender. Add a healthy Caitlin Clark to that mix and you have a team that should be competing with anyone in the league. But potential doesn't win games. Execution does. And right now, the Fever's execution is failing them when it matters most. They're making the kind of mistakes that losing teams make. Poor shot selection in crucial moments, defensive breakdowns that lead to easy baskets, and inability to maintain leads. These aren't talent issues. They're discipline issues, focus issues, coaching issues. They're the kind of problems that Sophie Cunningham is trying to address with her public challenge to the team. The free throw disparity in the Mystics game tells its own story. 26 attempts for Washington compared to Indiana's significantly fewer trips to the line. Some of that is officiating, sure, but most of it is about how the two teams were playing. Washington was aggressive, attacking the basket, putting pressure on the defense. Indiana was settling for jumpers, playing passively, allowing the Mystics to dictate terms. That's not who the Fever are supposed to be, and it's certainly not who they need to be if they want to make any noise in the playoffs. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Should Stephanie White's job be in jeopardy? It's a fair question given the team's performance and the growing disconnect between her approach and what the players seem to need. The Fever brought her in to take them to the next level, but right now they're barely maintaining the level they were at before. The rotations are questionable, the adjustments are late or non-existent, and the team's identity has become muddled. But firing a coach mid-season rarely solves problems, especially with a team dealing with this many injuries. The issue isn't just about X's and O's. It's about leadership, communication, and creating an environment where players can thrive. Sophie Cunningham's comments suggest that environment doesn't currently exist, at least not in the way it needs to. The question is whether White can adjust her approach or if she's too set in her ways to make the necessary changes. The clock is ticking on this season. With roughly 15 games left, the Fever don't have time for gradual improvement. They need immediate results. And that starts with their next game. Every possession matters now. Every rotation decision could be the difference between winning and losing. Every timeout needs to be used strategically. The margin for error that existed earlier in the season is gone. What Sophie Cunningham did with her post-game comments was draw a line in the sand. She essentially said, "This is not acceptable and we're better than this." That takes courage, especially when you're calling out not just your teammates, but your coaches and the entire organization by extension. But sometimes that's what leadership looks like. Sometimes someone has to be willing to say the uncomfortable truth that everyone else is thinking but not expressing. The response to Cunningham's challenge will tell us everything we need to know about this team's character. Will they rally around her words and rediscover their competitive fire? Will the coaching staff take the criticism constructively and make necessary adjustments? Or will they continue down the same path, making the same mistakes, offering the same excuses? The next few games will provide the answer, and Fever fans better hope it's the response Cunningham is looking for. The Minnesota Lynx game coming up will be a perfect test. Minnesota is everything Indiana wants to be. Well coached, disciplined, playing with an edge despite dealing with their own injury issues. If the Fever come out flat or fall into the same patterns that doomed them against Washington, it'll be clear that Cunningham's message didn't resonate. But if they play with the kind of intensity and purpose she's demanding, it could be the turning point of their season. One thing that can't be overlooked is the impact of the home crowd. Gainbridge Fieldhouse has been electric all season, but losing games like the one against Washington deflates that energy. Fans invest emotionally in this team, and when they see the same problems repeating without correction, that investment turns to frustration. The Fever need their home court to be an advantage. But that only happens when the team gives the crowd something to cheer about.
The business side of this matters, too.
The Fever have been the WNBA's golden goose this season in terms of attendance and viewership. People tune in to watch this team primarily because of Caitlin Clark, but also because of the excitement surrounding the franchise. If they miss the playoffs or get bounced in the first round, that momentum could stall. The organization has invested heavily in this roster and coaching staff. They need returns on that investment, and right now they're not getting them. Sophie Cunningham understands all of this. That's why her words carry so much weight. She's not just thinking about basketball. She's thinking about the franchise, the fans, the future. When she says nobody in the league thinks the Fever can do it anymore, she's challenging everyone associated with the team to prove otherwise. It's a call to arms that extends beyond the players to the coaches, the front office, and even the fans. The irony is that the Fever have actually played well at times without Caitlin Clark. They've shown they can win games through defense and balanced scoring. They've proven they have depth and resilience, but they haven't been able to sustain it. And that's where the coaching questions become unavoidable. Good coaches find ways to maximize what they have. They make adjustments that put players in position